Mm-hmm.
But even Malcolm X struggled, you know, with his white blood, you know, dyeing his hair blonde, you know. Even Malcolm X struggled at a point in his life.
Okay, you're live.
Okay.
Okay, we're live. All right, I see live on
Okay.
Facebook.
Well, okay, Sinadapi. Welcome to Native Wellness Institute's Power Hour. And it's right before the 4th of July weekend. And so we thought we would bring a commentary that would really help you think, would really help you think about what 4th of July means in the United States of America. And so we welcome you to the Power Hour. We're going to be with you. We have a guest, a very special guest. I'm going to have her introduce herself. But I wanted to begin with inviting you into the lodge. So during this hour, this sweetgrass braided in 3 strands for your mind, your body, and spirit. I'm going to light this on and off throughout this hour and, you know, just say, please have pity on, please help me and Judith, that our words, that our intentions are for healing, that our words and our intentions help our country build the alliances towards a democracy, the new democracy that we're going to experience. So we're inviting you into, I'll say the lodge, because we say that's what we call our teepees, but we're inviting you to spend the next hour with us, and we're going to share some things of history that would really like you to examine your own history and examine your transformation. We'll be going into our 16th week of the Power Hour, and going into the 16th week, man, it's so cool. Everybody's transforming. I mean, everybody in the country is transforming, you know, and they're calling it different things. Revolution, they're calling it, you know, spiritual awakening. They're even changing, you know, the Redskins are going to change their name. Woo! You know, all this stuff is happening. So so I'd like to begin. As you can tell, we're excited. So I'm going to invite our guest, Judith. And Judith and I became allies and friends in 2008 because my mother was the field officer for registering voters on the Blackfeet Reservation, and we got to know Judith then, and then in 2012, but we were able to register 2,700 Blackfeet that never voted in their lives because they didn't think they counted. And so that's where our alliance began. But Judith, I'd like to turn it over to you and have you please tell us, we want to know some of your story. What is your story, Judith? Please tell us.
Wow. Okay. Given the fact that I'm 67 now, there's a lot to the story, so I'll try to condense it some. But I was born in San Francisco and eventually raised in the South Bay, beginning in, I was in preschool. And moved to a little town called Milpitas, which is now one of the really big places in Silicon Valley. But it was a lot like Montana then, in that there were neighborhoods. It was a small town. It had no more than 12,000 people. I think it had less than that when we first moved there. There were no signalized intersections. There was a Ford plant. There was a GM plant. There was a naval air station, lots of civil servants and stuff like that. And I come from a Black family that on my maternal side, I can trace back to enslavement in Louisiana. And my great-great-grandmother actually ended up legally marrying the plantation owner, a white guy. Um,
Wow.
she was, and his name was Shaw. He was Irish, and she became known as Mistress Shaw. And in fact, if you watch the film 12 Years a Slave, which is a true story, although the dialogue is all made up, um, and there's creative license, as we would say. Um, anyway, she was played by Alfred Woodard in that film. Um, and so and they had some children together, and one of them was named Daniel. And
Mm.
Daniel walked from Louisiana to Southern Ohio after after the end of the Civil War, after emancipation. Although I think he was considered free. I'm not sure, about that alliance because she was mistress of the plantation and they had kids together. So I would think that he wasn't a slave, but he wasn't all white either. So I don't know. Um, so he got an education and he wound up actually going all the way to a PhD in theology. Um,
Wow.
yes, yes. Um, he's my he's the ancestor that I hearken back to because of his determination in walking from Louisiana to Ohio and taking 6 or 8 years to work his to do all the menial work at the university to get an education, a bachelor's and then a master's and then a PhD. So I I see his determination in me. So
So,
yeah.
so what year so we because it's good to frame these as we're beginning to heal is to look at the historical frame. So what year would that be about when he got his PhD?
Oh shoot, you froze on me.
Oh,
But it would
what?
have been
Okay.
probably about 1888 or so when he finally finished his, or maybe that's when he got married. I can't remember for sure. I'd have to look that up. I should have had that stuff right with me because it's
No,
off my
no,
head for the dates, you
that,
know?
that's it's just really good because it really helps Judith when we go across like when the first slaves came,
Mm-hmm.
when we began to gain ourselves, and by gaining ourselves, it's when we began to play the colonizer's game. So when we began to get our PhDs, we knew that that was a pass go.
Yeah.
But it was a bicultural intention, and it still is in 2020 because we have hundreds of Native American PhDs, and you have thousands of Black PhDs. So it helps us when we say, okay, 1880, because 1880 was a time when a lot of treaties were signed with the 577 tribes. And these treaties, they had, it was about acquiring our land.
Yes.
And our racism is attached to the land
Mm-hmm.
and how they thefted our land. So please continue introducing yourself. Because it's I think that you bring I mean you were a police officer for so long. Please tell us a little bit more because our audience is they want to get to know you since we're building an alliance with you right now.
Yeah. Um, so, but back to that land before I go into that whole thing, there was, there was a plantation. I don't know how many acres it was or sections. I don't know if they would call them sections back then. They probably did. Um, that land was thefted from indigenous land as well because the land there in Louisiana was so good for cotton growing, and I think sugarcane too. And so all that land on that plantation that my great grandfather was born on was had originally been native land, of course, you
Mhm.
know?
Mm.
So, but none of us Black folk, none of us Black descendants profited anything from that at all. So,
Mm.
but yeah, after graduating university, I became a cop, and I was going to send my picture wearing my patrol uniform and everything like that too, and I still can, but um, I did that for 13 years. I never had anticipated that I was going to do such a thing, but when I was going through middle school and high school, there was the heavy duty civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, John Lewis, all these icons, living icons working for civil rights. And at the same time, the Vietnam War was going on. Um, then the hippie movement and the Black Panthers and all this stuff was all overlaid. And there were violent demonstrations that became violent when police were there trying to put down the demonstration, and that's where the violence happened. Um, so it's not like Black folk set out to riot, and the word riot actually is a disturbance of the peace. Well, whose peace? We're talking white peace, okay? It's a disturbance of white people, their peace. We're trying to point out that we are always disturbed, you know? So um, I know you're hearing all this from a retired veteran cop, yeah. So so I did that for 13 years, and the only reason I left was I had wrecked my knees while I was staying in shape for the job. I was a long distance runner. It was a passion gone awry. I loved it. My idea of fun was to go out and run 10 or 15 miles in the morning. I still miss that, but I tore up my knees. And so I had to take a medical retirement. And
Mm.
then I just did a bunch of things. I did a lot of international travel. I got into nonprofit affordable housing work, which was really, really rewarding. And I also did volunteer work for a homeless shelter for women and their children. At that time, when I lived in San Jose, there were 27 homeless shelters in San Jose. There's probably a lot more now.
Yeah.
And so they were very specialized, and eventually moved out to Montana, which is a whole nother story. But a lot of times people hear it's the same story. You go out to visit friends who moved to Montana for work purposes, and then you, at the same time, you realize you're kind of fed up with where you do live, and you just want more peace and quiet and a healthier landscape, air, land, water, being able to see the beautiful views, being able to smell your sweetgrass. and and so we moved out here in 2005, and I worked for a company, a for-profit company for 6.5 years, and eventually just couldn't take that anymore. But at the same time, I had started to work for Obama's 2012 reelection campaign. That's when we met, was 2011, I think, Lori.
Yes.
Maybe it was 2012, I think. Because first I was team leader for organizing Bozeman, which is where we had moved to and where I live now. And then after I quit my job because I just couldn't take that anymore, at the same time, there's an opening for state director for Montana. And so Chicago, the headquarters, said, Judith, would you please be our state director in Montana? And I said, I would love to. And so that's how you and I met. It was at the state convention deciding who were going to be the delegates to the convention. I met
Yeah.
you, your mom, Betty Cooper, and Lori then. And it was the start of a great friendship. That was something like June of 2012. That's how long we've known each other.
Yes.
And just kept building that relationship just because we liked each other so much. It was like every time I was up north in that area, I was like, I gotta go see them. So, and then you and your mom and Lori were working, doing a lot of volunteer work for the Obama reelection campaign. Make no mistake, we weren't expecting to win Montana at that time. It had been a battleground state in 2008, but things had changed when people stayed away from the polls during the midterms in 2012. And the rise of the Tea Party and all that kind of stuff, guns everywhere by everyone. Um, and so after that, I got headhunted and I worked for Everytown for Gun Safety as state director on measures by which to reduce gun violence. I'm big on keeping bullets out of people. I know there's something, good about that, keeping bullets out of people. So, and because I had that law enforcement background, I really had, some oomph behind my name on that and in my experience. And then that the field programs all got rolled up, and Everytown created a new position for me called National Law Enforcement Outreach. So I was working from home here in Bozeman, but I was traveling all over the United States 10 to 12 days a month, talking to law enforcement executives all over about ways and measures by which to reduce gun violence and trying to get them to be public about it. A lot of them said that they personally agreed with it, that everybody should have background checks in buying firearms, but they didn't think that they had the political will to do that, which was very, very frustrating as all these mass shootings and stand your ground shootings and child access to loaded firearms was happening too. So, and while I was doing that, I was also on a shootings review team where we were looking at shootings in all 50 states. And it was very, very clear to me how embedded, how wrapped up into gun violence racism is. And I'm not talking this bull crap about black on black crime. It's all a matter of accessibility. White people are mostly killed by white people. Black people are mostly killed by black people. So, and then there's whole other social, very racial dynamics that cause poverty. It's so much poverty in Black, Brown, and Native communities that has to do with history in this country. Let's just say that right now. That's economic, it's health, it's political, it's just, oh God, so much, so much government. And then
Judith, just catch your breath for a minute, and I'll share with you, in Montana, with the tribes in Montana, in the 1960s, and on this reservation, we still have 1.5 million acres here, and we're right next to our allies, Fort Belknap. We have 7 reservations, but the average income for a family in the 1960s was $912 per year. And so I just want to kind of interject that before I let you continue, because we have to look at a society of tribal governments that existed without cash.
Yeah.
In harmony with the earth, in harmony with their language and their traditional ways, and didn't pollute, and and that's kind of what the pandemic is teaching some, that we might be going back to harmony with the earth. And so, but poverty is a framework that we must understand that goes hand in hand with racism.
Yes.
So I just want to interject that. So please continue. Tell us some more of your story.
I could talk more about that racial wealth gap too. Let's bookmark that and go back to that. But so anyway, I ended up leaving Everytown for gun safety because the whole racial thing and the fact that Everytown at that time was not tracking that, even though it was so obvious to me as a Black person. And I would point out all these things. The worst part of that was, when a child gets access to a loaded firearm, they can be as young as 2 and hold that firearm and pull the trigger and kill themselves or whoever is around them, whether it be a parent, a sibling, whether it's somebody 500 yards down the street, But people were rarely charged for that in all 50 states because they had, quote unquote, suffered enough, which is a tragedy. Whether it was a grandparent taking care of them, a babysitter, or a parent, or just an older sibling or whatever. Um, unless there was a warrant for their arrest, which was unusual in any case. Um, oddly, well, not so oddly, given society, the nature of society, if a person was like living in a motel from week to week and had rotten or missing teeth or something like that, that would be seen as sort of like a lesser person and they would charge them. But if the responsible adult was of color, Black, brown, or Indigenous, they were always charged, Theda. Always charged, all 50 states.
Yes.
And this is not
Yes.
like law enforcement got on a massive conference call in all 50 states and conspired to do this. Racism is in the air. It's like dust flying in the air all the time where you cannot see it until the light shines just so and you see it laying on surfaces, floating in the air in the light stream. This is the air we breathe. Racism is in the air we breathe here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Judith, can you tell us a little bit how you formed the Montana Racial Equity? Just give us a little bit of that history, and then I'll add how the tribes are gaining their sovereignty.
Well, I left every town because I was burned out and I was depressed. It was all my coping mechanisms for depression were overwhelmed by exhaustion and Ferguson. Mike Brown had been shot. All the demonstrations in Ferguson and Trayvon Martin and all those kinds of things. And so once after I left and just sort of rested and recovered, and I thought, okay, well, I'm not done doing good things, for the world. So what do I want to do? And so all my background, all that stuff, all the determination from my great-great-grandfather, that's what formed the Montana Racial Equity Project. Because I knew I had the skills and abilities and the talents and the experience and the determination to do it. And so it's a nonprofit, it's a 501c3. It's based in Bozeman because I live here, but we work the state. So we're not just a city or county or regional organization. So our mission is to advocate racial equity and justice for all historically marginalized, disenfranchised, and oppressed people. So that's very inclusive of LGBTQIA, the two most persecuted religions, Muslim and Jewish, persons with disabilities, especially physical disabilities, and we choose access on that. But in fact, what we concentrate on is racial equity and justice with a very inclusive lens, because racial equity and justice, there's this whole thing in white America, the saying that in company, at parties or dinners or whatever, the things that you don't talk about, and it's kind of an old saying, is money, sex, no, rock and roll, no, not rock and roll, money, sex, and religion, But in fact, the thing that tops them all is race. Nobody talks about race. It's the thing that is always buried in some sub-level basement with dirty, stinky rags over top of it that nobody ever wants to approach. But it's embedded in everything. Like I said, the dust in the air. So we tackle it head on. So we're the only Black-led nonprofit in the entire state, and we choose to work racial equity and justice. And yes, we have a target on our back from white nationalists. So there's lots of security measures that we have in place, and that were very expensive. And yes, I'm always watching my back, but this is the way it is. And so you and I still work together from time to time. I've been through the Native Wellness Institute training, the trainer. We've done so many things together because we align so much on so many things.
So Judith, let's one of our alliances. I was part of a team of Black Indians in California. Carmela Wool, who was one of my mentors, who is gone now. But when we were doing diversity work, and this is like in the 60s and the 70s and up through the 80s, I noticed that we had a similar approach. And so back then, and so we're just sharing with, our audience and who's watching, back then, one of the healing, and this was a healing question on race. And so I'll ask you, we'd start all, because everyone wanted to, and they'd say unlearn racism. They would want to, they had all kinds of terms, but these were how we started the healing sessions especially in the early 80s. Carmela Wool would always, we'd begin, and this is in the diverse California, but I think that we can ask it today in 2020 and anywhere in the United States, is to begin to examine the own lenses, and it's the lenses by which you look through. And these lenses come from your parents' lenses, from your great grandparents' lenses, and then they come from how you were educated. You begin to get lenses. And so the first question is, if you weren't the race that you are now, what would be your second choice? And ask this of your family. Ask, and have dialogue about it. And sometimes it takes a person weeks to come up with the answer. Some they know immediately. And then once you kind of have the dialogue, because these are healing questions, the second question that you ask yourself if you want to unlearn racism is, if you weren't the race that you are right now, what would be your last choice? And see there, Judith, I know that your organization is doing that in Montana today. And so in that healing, when you answer that, and that might take weeks, but you might have it right away. Oh, I don't want to be that race. Right. And whatever that race is, then the challenge right now for alliances, and this is the healing, is all you got to do is build relationships with that race, that last choice. And that's what's going to bring us together in alliances, that and understanding. And as you form relationships, you get to know their history and understand how they are what they are today. It's just like I study white people's history and I totally understand them.
Right?
Right. But now I'm giving them an opportunity to study our history.
Yes.
And understand us. And that's the beauty of where we are, that this is actually a gift in 2020. The beauty is that we're learning each other's history and we can have some forgiveness. And then there's many things that we can do so that it's a better world that we come out on the other side of this pandemic. So Judith, I know you came prepared, and of course, we're you're 67 and I'm 64, so we have 130 years of our own little issues of civil rights.
Right.
So I'm going to ask, can you begin to tell us some of the gems or the lessons that you learned in your story? And this is yours, located to Oakland, California, where I was raised. So we were put in the middle of Oakland, California, but my transformation was I only knew Blackfeet people. So I went through cultural shock. I was 7.5 years old, and this is something that I actually blacked out about, because when I came home from school, my mother found me in a fetal position hiding behind the door, and I was sobbing, and mom was saying, "What's wrong, Nellie? What's wrong, my girl?" And I just all I could get out was that there's no Blackfeet at my school. I thought the world was Blackfeet until I was put in a school, but everybody at my school was African American. So I grew up, I guess what people would call the ghetto. I grew up in the ghetto, and I grew up with, the civil rights. I grew up, I was a probation officer. I was like you.
I didn't know you
I
were a probation officer.
I was telling my mom this morning. I said, Mom, remember when I was a probation officer and I used to go out solo alone into Oakland? And I would go out and I'd be looking for young men, and they were men. It wasn't women that were on probation. And I would go out. I'd be on East 14th Street. I'd be in the ghetto, and I would go out and I would go into neighborhoods, and they would all look at me because I was the only one that looked like me that wasn't African American. And so they either thought you were stupid or a badass. So I would go out there and I would say the young man's name, and I would say, I'm here because I don't want them to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And so that was, I would go out there, and I was talking to my mom this morning. I said, Mom, I didn't tell you that because I didn't want you to worry. But I said, I used to go out in Oakland by myself. And you know what's weird, Mom, is my Nitsitipi, my Blackfoot person, how I was raised. I didn't have no fear. I really saw my role as aligning.
Mm.
I didn't want that young brother. I didn't want him to become the statistic. I didn't want him to drop out of school. I didn't want him, all of that stuff. And so I was like, and I went out there, and I had this in Blackfoot, we have an intention. And I went out, and that's what I was telling Mom. I said, Mom, yeah, I was trying to think. I didn't have no fear. I guess I didn't have fear. I think I had love.
Mm.
I had love going in because I was trying to build those alliances. So that's what I'm talking about is, we want to hear your story because, this is a platform for Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And building our alliance, we really want to understand the platform, because look at this rich history that you come from. So share with us some of the stories of, at what age did you start to say, I guess I'm fighting for my own civil rights. Can you share some of those stories, Judith?
Oh, yeah. Those started in fourth grade.
Okay.
So, those started in fourth grade, where I was a voracious reader as a child, and I still am. I love to read and learn. I'm just like a year and lifelong learner, as I know you are as well. And so I had a library card, and we had the bookmobile that would come to our little neighborhood once a week. Right? And so the summer, even though I was out doing all sorts of stuff, swimming lessons and going and playing with friends and things like that, I would read. And so when I went back to school for fourth grade, on the first day, the teacher asked us, okay, take a sheet of paper and write down all the books you read during the summer. And I had loved these books so much. I remembered the names of all these books. And so I did 2 columns on the front page and then a half a column on the back side. And by the way, all my instructors were white except for one. I had one Black instructor in middle school for one class. I don't know what it was, maybe English. And she did not believe me. That teacher insisted that I'd been lying. How the heck would I lie? How could I come up with all these titles? Because it was well over 50 books. It was probably more like 70. And I was just so stunned by that. And I remember telling my mother about it, no, I don't even think I told my mom about that. But that was just like, why would she say I was lying? And that's when I finally figured out that years later that was my first real experience with racism from that I could tell from that I remembered, and that was going into fourth grade. I couldn't put a name to it. I didn't, I couldn't put a name to it then. And then in college, I had, and as a sophomore in high school, I had another really big experience with it. When I was called out of my sophomore English class, I had a note from my high school counselor to come see him in his office. And I was like, what the heck is this? I was just, how could I be in trouble? Why would I be going to the counselor? And I'd never talked to him before or anything. He was a tall white guy with curly blonde hair. And so I went to the office and I sat down, and he proceeded to tell me that I was not college material and to give up the idea of going to college. Now, I was college prep, what is now like AP classes and all that kind of stuff, because I was going to college because everybody it wasn't a matter of would you go to college or not in our family. It was a matter of which college you were going to go to. Yes. And so that was really confusing. I was getting good grades. I was, taking all these classes that somebody who wasn't going to college wouldn't be taking. And I offhandedly told my mother about that late that afternoon when she got home from work. And she was a teacher in the school district at the same time. She knew the principal. There was a minor earthquake in the South San Francisco Bay Area when she stomped over there, virtually stomped to the high school and read the riot act to the principal. And I never had any problems after that with that counselor or anybody else again, but it was just really, really weird. Really weird. It was racist. It was racist. Why would you try to sabotage a student like that instead of encouraging them to reach for the stars, Theda? You got an explanation for that? Because I don't.
Well, it's thank you for that story, because I can share in a nutshell. When I was, I had a principal named Mr. Sjogren, and my mother had told me that all of my grades up to the 7th grade, was the time when I was, she said, when you get to 8th grade, your grades are going to count for college. And so you better make sure that your grades are good from 8th grade on. So then I kind of, in my Blackfeet mind, and I'm sorry because I don't know any other way to think, I thought, well, I could kind of mess up till 7th grade. So,
I get it. That'd be my black mind too.
Right. So in the 7th grade, it was illegal for girls to wear pants.
Right.
If you wore pants to school, you got suspended. So that was like an example of civil rights. And so, and this is just in my own thinking. We gathered all the girls, which were predominantly, we were all mixed race. It was diverse, but I remember gathering all the girls, and we had our own meeting, and we thought that it wasn't fair that we couldn't wear pants. And so we know that we got suspended. So we organized a nonviolent protest.
Mm-hmm.
We all decided we would all wear our pants to school on the same day. So we, so there's like, good. I think there was maybe more than 50 of us, because some were going to do it, but then they got scared. Because sometimes when you're fighting for your civil rights, you get scared.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because you just keep going at it. And so we got to school, and we were wearing pants, and we all got suspended. And so then what the healing part is, our families went to the PTA, and then they had several meetings, and the outcome, and this was months later, is they decided out of fairness that it was okay for girls to wear pants to school. But Mr. Sjogren, because this part, and I was retaliatory, I guess. I was just test the system. I would do things, and he would suspend me. So this is what he said to me in the 7th grade, and it's a racist. He told me, and this is just me and him in the room. he told me, you're going to amount to nothing.
Ooh.
At the record you're going and the rate you're going, you're going to amount to nothing.
Wow.
And he told me, and he's my principal. So, but I remember looking at him and thinking, no, I'm going to prove you wrong.
Mhm.
And remember, so then this, in a nutshell, because this isn't just about me, when I got both my degrees from UC Berkeley, I got into UC Berkeley when I was 17.
Yeah.
And I got bachelor's and I got my master's in public health from UC Berkeley. So I took those two diplomas and I made a visit to Mr. Sjogren. And I visited him and I gave him a copy of my 2 degrees. And what you said to me in the 7th grade, that wasn't a good thing to say. But anyway, I love you anyway, Mr. Sjogren. I'm going to pray for you. And I gave him my copies of my diplomas. so that's a little bit of my journey of fighting for civil rights. So Judith, tell us a little bit. I remember when we were visiting and you were going around Montana and you were in Glendive. Do you remember that? Can you
forget it.
do you want to or do you want to share with us when you began to travel around Montana and you were making waves about changing people's isms? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can. Oh Lordy. I can. So I would travel when I was state director is when I got out of Bozeman and I really started to travel around Montana a lot. I mean, as before I was state director of Montana, I'd done some traveling, but I hadn't been able to really go to the Northeast or even to the Southeast, and certainly not to, I didn't, I might have gone to a Crow Fair one time, but no, I don't even think I had done that. So we, oh, there's a picture of me with in my patrol uniform. Okay, so yeah, that's me. Back in the old days, you can see how that car was. You can recognize that's an old car. So anyway, and so I went to several reservations and I got to meet up with you guys in Blackfeet and everything. But when I was going to, I had to make a trip up to Glendive. So I went with one of our fellows who was a young Black gal. And we went to Dawson Community College to try to, get people registered to vote, to be enthusiastic about voting for Obama. Now, that was when I was not executive director of a nonpartisan nonprofit as I am now, but I can still talk about that when I was partisan. So just to clear things up in case for our own, for the Montana Racial Equity Project. So then I was meeting with the Dawson County Democrats afterwards, but there was a break in between. And my fellow and I had time to go and have lunch. So the only place we could find to have lunch was a Subway sandwich place or Subway deli. I don't know what you call them, Subway. And it was right off of I-90 in Glendive. And she went in first and she ordered something to eat. And well, I went in and I got my laptop and all the stuff so we could just work for an hour and a half or so while we were eating our lunch. It was very quiet. There was only one table otherwise occupied. Had 4 sort of what you would call good old boys sitting there, their cowboy hats, their button-down shirts with, with the little squigglies on the pockets and jeans and cowboy boots. And so I settled myself and I went back over to get, to order. So I stood there at the counter and the person who had already served my friend Karen, the fellow, was done and he was just like cleaning up over there. And there was what looked like a manager or something who's there counting change right there at the register, right where I was standing. And she completely ignored me, didn't look at me, didn't say anything to me, like, I'll be with you in a minute. She just kept counting money over and over and over, coins over and over and over again. Like maybe she was balancing out or something, but not even an acknowledgement. I was the only person of color in the entire place. So I just stood my ground. And finally, the guy who was making the sandwiches and stuff, after he had looked over at this, like nothing happening for at least 2 minutes, finally came over and said, "Can I do something? Can I help you?" I said, "Yes, I'd like to order such and such." He said, "Okay." So he took my order and he also took my money because she had walked away by then. But that was basically a denial of service where she just didn't even want to have anything to do with me. And then later, Karen, who had gone back out to the car to get something, because it turned out we were right underneath a air conditioning fan that was blowing really cold air on us. She wanted to go get a fleece. She came back in, and those four men said as she walked by them, "When did they start letting the N-word, plural, in here?" And she just stopped in her tracks and she looked around and he said, the guy who had said that apparently said, "Oh, you want to come sit on my lap?" And no. And then again, he said the same thing, and she just walked away. She didn't tell me about it at first, but she was so upset when she got back to the table. And I could tell something was really wrong. And she was, "Nothing is wrong. Nothing is wrong." And so finally I got it out of her. And I turned around and I looked at them and I go, "You know what? Don't even worry about them because they're cowards. They said that to you. They didn't even say it to me. They didn't have the balls, frankly, to say it to me, So those guys are cowards." And so that really shook her up because she said if she hadn't been representing Obama at the time, she would have flailed. She would have gone in on him.
No, thank you, Judith, because I think as we're doing this historical overlay of how we're treated in present day and how you were treated in that manner. I just wanted thank you, Jolene, for I wanted to tell a little story of when Judith and our efforts across the United States, but specifically in our area, we were the 7 tribes were allying with you at that. You were campaigning, but I wanted to say that there's also a picture, Jolene, of the tribes and during when slavery was just ending. I wanted to, because in our remaining time, just let's kind of give some planting of seeds of the history of Alliance and why it's so important for Brown and why it's so important for Brown and Black to ally. This photo that you see right here was common, during, there was so many alliances with the tribes, east of the Mississippi that would, this photo you see were the parents of that African-American child that you see right there were murdered right after freedom and slavery, a lot of them, and they were orphans. And so a lot of the tribes, they took them in. And they're right at that beginning, there was an alliance. They were treated as equal. They were treated as one. And what's so cute? I mean, like she's dressed in Indian and she probably was speaking full Indian, but there was a love, and I can't, there was a love that people of color have for each other.
Yes.
It's a love. And so I wanted to just show that photo because there is even in present day 2020, and it's a healing, and it's a cool healing. There's a lot of Black Indians and a lot of where they're half tribal and they're half Black.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to welcome them into the discussion.
Yeah.
We want to welcome you into telling us a little bit about your healing. And so, one of I wanted to just share a short story, and then around Nelson Mandela, and then I wanted to give you some time before, because we have this hour. My mother was very good friends with Nelson Mandela while he was alive, and so the short story is, when Nelson Mandela got out of prison in 1990, one of the things, when he toured America, he came to Oakland, California, and they had him scheduled to be in the Oakland Coliseum of 60,000 people. And there was, at that time, we had a lot of alliances. Cesar Chavez was around. We were raised with, the real Black Panthers, and we were raised, there was just this alliance. And so the tribal nations got together because they wanted to welcome Nelson Mandela at the Oakland airport.
Yes.
So my mother had gotten gifts. She got shawls. She got all these gifts because, we're always, we got these together and went down to the airport. And what happened was, you had to have FBI clearance. So this racist policy is, if you didn't have the clearance, you couldn't get near Nelson Mandela. Mm-hmm. And so when the plane came in, it flew in, and they had the red carpet where it was supposed to meet, all the mayor and all of the dignitaries. But somehow the plane couldn't stop in front of where the red carpet was. And it went past the red carpet, and it stopped right in front of the Indians.
Is that how that happened?
Right in front of the Indians, and so they couldn't back up. So then they, here's Nelson Mandela and Winnie, and then they had their nurse, and so they had them come down the steps, and they played the African national anthem. And so when they played when they had the African national anthem, and all the Indians were standing there, my mother went to Nelson Mandela. So now, there's all this, they were trying to get him to the Coliseum. And so he sent his nurse over, and the nurse snuck down and came over to the Indians, and they had their big bag of gifts and presents. And they had this, I'm just going to grab it. They had this letter that my mother had typed, and my mom used to type with two fingers. And I'm just going to read it because I think it speaks for itself. It's dated June 30th, 1990. And it says, Nelson Mandela of South Africa. Dear Mr. Mandela, a warm welcome to our homeland of our ancestors. We, the American Indian natives of this land, are honored and privileged to welcome you to the Western Hemisphere. In 1992, it will be 500 years since non-natives came to our land. Since then, we have sacrificed so much of our culture and the loss of our people by foreign substances that is not our native people's way. Today, we still have many struggles, the people survival. Despite every attack of abuse from some good and bad people, the American Indians are still here. Our culture is maintained and honored by our own people, and some importers. She used to call them importers. Many tribes are teaching and sharing pride in who they are. The children are honored by many for their future. However, in our land of plenty, the world's greatest economic development, the Indian reservations and the urban Indian populations remain the same, the highest unemployment rate, substandard housing, and no homes, hunger, poor health, extreme poverty, conditions where alcoholism is the #1 health problem. More than 500 tribes with 236 different languages, whose culture's heritage is so rich in having a way to live that could work for the whole world, have this daily dilemma. Our struggles continue. The US government have met with you to honor and acknowledge our sovereign rights as an African nation. This too is what the American Indians asked for. Again, it's a true honor to meet you and to welcome you here. Sincerely, on behalf of the many Indian people and many tribes, the Bay Area Indian community, Betty Cooper. And that's how their friendship started. So in a nutshell, when he got to the Coliseum, and there were 60,000 people, and they only allowed him to read a 20-minute speech that they had approved of. And 11 minutes into that speech, Nelson Mandela put down the approved speech and he took out this letter. And he read it. He defied for his civil rights. He read it. And, would be happy to share it on NWI's page. And in that's when I began, and there's many, I'm gonna let you share some, but that's when I began in 1990 fighting for civil rights with every breath that I have. Yes. And everything that I do and will continue to do. So I wanted to share just that nutshell story. But Judith, we have some time remaining. What would you like to share? Because we got an international audience here. But we also this is July 3rd. Before tomorrow, we're going to be celebrating. And our country is great. Our country is great because it's mainly people of color. Our country is great. So would you please, Judith, kind of share, sister, share with us, some of the things that we need to pay attention to on this celebration, this 4th of July celebration.
We need to pay attention to the fact that the United States Declaration of Independence and becoming independent from the Britons had so much to do with slavery and the enslavement of people and holding Native Americans, the indigenous to this land, as quote unquote savages and ripping off all that land. So I, some years ago, stopped celebrating the independence of the United States because of what it was founded on. It wasn't founded on you or on me, but literally on our bodies and on the land that was stolen and that we tilled, that we worked, that we harvested, all for the benefit of white people. And that's why, and this is a bit of an old figure, it's probably less now. That is why, as far as the racial wealth gap between the average white American family and the average Black American family, for every $100 the white American family has, the average Black family has $5.04, a friggin' $5.04. It is less than $5 now. So I celebrate Juneteenth. Our whole office does. I give our whole office, we're all BIPOC. Our whole office gets Juneteenth as a paid holiday. Okay, so they could take July 4th, 3-day weekend too, but we're doing that in honor of how this country was actually really founded. And we also take Indigenous Peoples Day off too. So we don't call it that C word. We call it Indigenous Peoples Day. That's a paid holiday as well. So, and everything that I do is working towards civil rights, is working towards racial equity and justice. That is my thing. I want to leave this world better than when I came onto it with that, because that has actually been embedded in every friggin' thing I've ever done. Everything. And even when I was a police officer, my mindset was that I was a guardian, not that I was a warrior. It was never us versus them for me. I was a guardian. And so that's everything. Yeah. And then being able to meet the president in the White House have him hug me like this. He gave me a big hug. This picture was taken right after a big hug, a peck on the cheek. Thank you for everything you're doing. And then turn around and snap. So I recognize that look in my eyes as a deer in the headlights look, because the leader of the free world, really and truly then,
Yeah.
just had, and he was holding my hand and he had his arm around my back. You can see his little fingers on my shoulder, on the opposite shoulder from him. And that was just a very super memorable experience. I took my sister with me and to the White House. It was during a holiday party. All the state directors had been called in. Would to meet the president so he could say thank you to us personally. So it was really, really nice.
Well, but Judith, thank you so much, because, in our time before we say goodbye, we always had a saying that the honor of one is the honor of all. Mm-hmm. And what we're asking, Native Wellness Institute is asking you, is that there's many voices right now, but the message is justice for all.
Yes, it is.
Justice for all. And I want to just thank you, Judith, for coming to be with us in this arena. And, would like to maybe welcome you back in the future, because this ain't done yet.
It ain't done. And remember, there was a time too that there was an Idle No More protest in the middle of winter at the state capitol. And I was the only Black person who showed up with African Americans in solidarity with Native Americans on Idle No More sign, and it was freezing cold. And this is just, and I love the solidarity in this Black Lives Matter movement that was so tragically shocked the country in this historic moment of inflection with the horrific murder of George Floyd. And I love how we're working together on this, because we're the two Native Americans and African Americans. We have so much in common, and so much all that history that you have spoken about, where we've been in solidarity with one another. Anybody who's got any prejudice from one group to the other and back is just way out of step. You guys need to get your act together. We are better when we collaborate and form and recognize our commonalities, is as far as being oppressed and trying to be destroyed by this country. So I love the solidarity between Native Americans and Black Lives Matter folks right now.
No, thank you, Judith. And so we want all of you, starting this weekend, enjoy your family, celebrate, dance, sing, enjoy your Indigenous, because just celebrate, just make it love, make it coming together. And, that is, I guess Native Wellness Institute just wants to send that wish out for everyone, Judith, your family, all of our NWI family, all of our allies in Australia, all of our allies in Canada, all of our allies in Aotearoa, New Zealand, all of our allies in South, when the condor meets the eagle is happening. The two continents are coming together. We're at a time where we can really, all you have to do is wear a mask. If you wear a mask, we'll help each other heal through the pandemic.
We have a long way to go. Let's stick together.
Yes, and so we want to thank you for being with us this past hour. We want to say that we send love and we send respect to you. And remember those two questions. If you weren't the race that you are now, what would be your second choice and what would be your last choice? Because you have to teach your grandchildren and on the Power Hour.
Thank you, Theda. And if we do this again, I'll tell you the version of that. What choice would you be that I present to cops when I'm talking?
Oh, okay. Very good. Thank you, Judith.
Bye, everybody. Bye. Thank you.